So, if you're having physical symptoms from anxiety, or if you've been told that some physical symptoms that you are having are from anxiety, these can be very, very strong and very scary. You are probably wondering, could these really be anxiety? Maybe I wasn't so worried and I still am having these very strong physical reactions. Or maybe you weren't worrying at all and the physical reactions just hit you out of the blue. So, this can be very confusing, and many people wonder, is this anxiety or is it something else? So, first thing I have to say is if you're having serious symptoms, you always want to see a doctor and get everything checked out. There are a number of things that can look the same, but if you've been given a clean bill of health and maybe your doctor even told you nothing wrong with you except anxiety, which I don't really like that phrase. And I really hate it when they say it's all in your head. But in any case, if the doctor has said these symptoms can be caused by anxiety, as we go through this, you'll see probably they can. So I do want to reiterate, anxiety is not all in your head. So even if a doctor says there's nothing wrong with you, these symptoms are anxiety, know that anxiety does cause real physical symptoms. They are uncomfortable. They can be very scary, as I said. They are real. You are really physically feeling something. So, we're going to talk about why your brain does this, but we are all interconnected, okay? And anxiety can impact every one of our major physiological systems in our body. So, cardiovascular symptoms, increased heart rate, you can have a pounding heart, a racing heart, you can feel palpitations from anxiety, sometimes fluttering or a skipped beat. You can have chest pain, you can get lightheaded, dizzy, you can feel faint or unsteady. And as I said earlier, having these symptoms, have them checked out by a doctor. However, if they're tied to anxiety, you can then begin to treat them as anxiety, okay? Hopefully that made sense. So, gastrointestinal symptoms, difficulty swallowing, pretty common. A change in appetite. Some people, when they get very anxious, can't eat at all, and other people just want to do nothing but eat. So, it really can impact you either way. Your stomach could be upset. You can feel nauseous, diarrhea, other digestive problems, constipation. So it really can impact many things in your gut. All right. So, respiratory, shortness of breath, you can hyperventilate, and then your muscular skeletal system, muscle tension, very, very common. Tremors, shaking, tics, right? You can get like a little pulse, your eyes, pretty common. Hand, it can happen different places. Headaches, very common with anxiety. Muscle aches, pains, cramps, etc. And I'm going to tell you why all of these symptoms actually have a common cause when they're caused by anxiety. I mean, the anxiety has an effect which causes all these. I'll get there. Okay. Other symptoms, numbness, tingling in your extremities. Oops, already mentioned tics, sweating, dry mouth, fatigue, insomnia. So you can really see how the physical symptoms of anxiety can really impact your whole body. So let's talk a little bit briefly about the adrenaline and cortisol cycle. So when you have a stressor, that's what a stressor comes in, your adrenaline begins to spike. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. If you have a saber-toothed tiger you need to run away from, you want your adrenaline to kick in, right? But also sometimes a small amount of adrenaline can be motivating to study for an exam, to prepare for a big work meeting, to, motivate yourself to get off the couch, do what you need to do. So a certain amount of adrenaline helps us get up in the morning. So a little bit can be helpful. Too much can be problematic. But anyway, when adrenaline kicks in, shortly thereafter, a hormone called cortisol kicks in, and that begins to go up. And as that peaks, then the adrenaline starts to drop. So, stressor, adrenaline goes up, cortisol goes up, then they both drop. Hopefully, a period with no stressors, another stressor hits, it happens again. Our bodies are built to deal with this. Like, so if your stressors are happening and your adrenaline spiking once in a while, often you won't have major physical symptoms. However, if you have continual stressors, and by stressors, I would like to say stressors are real. They definitely are real. Some can be very, very serious stressors, obviously, and some can be minor. How we deal with that stressor impacts this cycle as well. So if we respond to minor stressors with a lot of anxiety and worry, right, which is really kind of what an anxiety disorder is. So we're continually responding to every stressor, whether it's a big one or not, with the adrenaline, and then the cortisol kicks in. As you can see with this graph, with those continual stressors and the way we respond, another piece of this is that the cortisol never gets a chance to come down. So cortisol can remain elevated chronically on an ongoing basis. And that has actually been implicated in a number of major diseases. So not saying this to freak anybody out, but to give you some motivation that you can have agency over your anxiety. Anxiety is very treatable. When I worked with people as a therapist over 20 years, I working with anxiety was very satisfying for me as a therapist, and it was satisfying for the client because people could make major, major progress. So I want to give you that hope. But continually elevated cortisol levels are tied to diabetes, osteoporosis. I only just recently learned that, which is sort of interesting. Cardiovascular disease, it's sort of obvious. A weakened immune system, high blood pressure, also obvious. It can impact sexual desire, your libido, reproductive functions. Again, it's pretty comprehensive in the body if we are continually responding with a stress response. Okay, so let's talk about why this happens, right? So, your body is designed to deal with dangerous situations. Our brains evolved that way. We have an amygdala, we have a fight, flight, and freeze response. So if we are actually being chased by a dinosaur, right? Or a scary dog or whatever, we're designed that it will kick in, our fear response will kick in. Our adrenaline will spike, our muscles will tense, our heart rate goes up, we have digestive issues, right? You don't need to really be digesting your food if you're being chased by a wild animal. You need to not digest that food and just run. And you get a very single minded focus. And I want to come back to that single minded focus because I think it's quite important. And we don't always talk about that being an impact of this fear response. So we need this fear response. We want it. Unfortunately, we need it in some situations. The problem is when we think about that dinosaur, when we think about that scary thing happening, our body has the same response. So simply thinking about being attacked by whatever the danger is, same thing, our adrenaline spikes, our muscles tense, our heart rate goes up, we have digestive issues, we get a single-minded focus, okay? So I'm gonna stick some other videos at the end where I go into this in more detail. If you haven't seen them, I think they'll be really useful to watch. But that single-minded focus, the reason I wanna come back to it is that most of the problems that we face today really need our whole brain online. We need to be able to think creatively. We need to pull in solutions. We need to be aware of what is it I can do right now? And what is it I want to do to be prepared to face this problem in the future or to face these possibly difficult situations in the future? So you really want you want the whole brain working, not just that overactive amygdala, and you wanna be thinking creatively. That's not what happens when you have to run away from a wild animal, right? And again, I'm talking mainly about running away in these examples, but the fight, flight, or freeze, really all three of those have these same components. All the physical symptoms of anxiety, remember I said there's a common thread through everything? We went through all the systems in the body, but there's a common thread. They can all be tied to a fight, flight, or freeze response. So, for example, your inability to swallow or to eat. If you have to fight, flee, or freeze, you're not eating a meal, right? If you have to fight, flee, or freeze, you're not digesting your food right. In fact, the opposite. So, actually, constipation can be seen as tied to the flight or fight response, whereas something like diarrhea is more tied to the freeze response. And I do talk a lot about the freeze response in some videos I'll link at the end. We don't always think of that as being part of our fight flight response, but it is, and it's an important one to understand because the freeze response kicks in when we can't fight and we can't flee. So, for example, and you'll see this with animals, if an animal is being attacked by a larger animal and it can't run away, it will go into a freeze state. So, a number of the symptoms that we talked about are that you may not think were like anxiety related are freeze state related, such as the dizziness, lightheadedness, passing out is a type of freeze response. The opposite, right? The heart rate going way up, the heart palpitations, that is part of the fight or flight response. Okay. So, what do you do about this? So, the first thing to do when those physical symptoms hit is to simply label them. Label them anxiety. Don't go down a rabbit hole of what if it's this, what if it's that, or oh, why do I get this? Just, okay, there's those feelings. I know what they are. I don't like them, but I know what they are. Label them anxiety. Then the next thing is to practice techniques that relax you physiologically and practice these techniques regularly, not when you're in the middle of, an anxiety attack, but daily. Incorporate them into your day on a regular basis. And my next slide, I'm going to talk about what a few of those are. And then the third thing is to learn how your anxiety cycle works. So practicing techniques that relax your physiology in a healthy way. This would be things like diaphragmatic breathing, yoga, grounding techniques. It could also be, taking a walk with your dog, walking in nature, whatever makes you feel like you are sort of calming down your overall body. Now, I'm not talking here about alcohol or benzodiazepines because those are biphasic. They have two phases. So when you have a drink or take a benzodiazepine, you feel an immediate relaxation response, but it's biphasic. So it has a half life. And when it's through that half life, you have more anxiety than you did before you took the substance. So things like that don't fall into this category of relaxing in a healthy way. Because what we're really trying to do is to reset your physiology to operate on a calmer basis. So that's also why I say to practice these things regularly. Now, meditation can be one of the best techniques to use, but I know it's really challenging for a lot of people who have anxiety. It can be really challenging to sit and simply do a mindful meditation. So, guided meditations are actually easier. And there are a lot of great meditation apps out there. And I do want to share with you, just in case you're interested, that I do have some meditations on two of the apps, and I'll show them here on the next slide. So, Aura Health has Aura Meditation and Sleep app, and it also has some CBT type talks. And I have a number of meditations on there, as well as some sleep meditations. And same thing with Insight Timer. Now, the two apps are very different. You can try both of them. Insight Timer gives you access to a lot of free material, but then there's a paywall. If you want other material, you have to subscribe. And with Aura, it is a paid app, but I have a 30-day free link for you. So I will show a QR code here on the screen. If you shoot that, you'll get 30 days free with Aura, so you can try it out. I'll also put the link in the description. And there are many other meditation teachers on these apps other than me. So if you do show up there, do let me know. Okay, let's move on and talk about the anxiety cycle. So, the common thread with those techniques we talked about that are physiologically relaxing is that they help you be here now. They help you bring things back to the present moment, particularly if you practice that. So rather than letting your mind wander and project into the future, which is what makes anxiety worse and worse, they bring it back to this moment. So even if your anxiety starts with a physical symptom, it then leads to usually to some kind of thought that then makes the anxiety worse, or it can lead to a behavior that makes anxiety worse. And either of those goes into this cycle. So, this video being part of a three-part series, the one being how your body responds to made up stories, right? So, when you think of a story and then your body responds, this one is all about that body response with the detail. And then next week, I'm going to come out with one which is going to be on, but there is no story. A lot of people will be like, I feel anxious and there is no story happening. So that's where I'm going to, that video next week. So make sure you're subscribed. We'll talk actually about how our past experiences get linked deep in the brain. So there's a link between certain sensory information and then an emotional response. And this link can be either positive or negative. And this can often be the trigger for anxious physical symptoms. And sometimes, as I said earlier, out of your conscious awareness. So let me know what you thought of this video. Let me know if it was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions. I will be, as I'm talking here at the end, I'm going to put up some of the other videos I think will be super helpful for you. And I will see you next week.